Today is October 9th, and today we're going to be looking at the Week 6 power rankings, at least how I see them for all 32 teams. Going to start off at number 32. It seems like a pretty easy and obvious choice. The New York Jets, they're the only team without a win in the NFL. They just lost 37-22 in a game that didn't even feel like it was a 15-point deficit. That game felt like the Jets lost by 5 or 6 touchdowns. At 31, I have the Las Vegas Raiders. They, like the Jets, lost by a lot, but this time they actually lost by 34 to the Indianapolis Colts, 6-40. Las Vegas offensively has looked pretty bad. Ashton Genty has started to come on a little bit, but the turnovers from Geno Smith, the defense overall has been poor. It's just not been a good start to the year for Las Vegas. Tennessee got their first win of the season in a 22-21 victory over the Arizona Cardinals. A game where it was more like the Cardinals lost the game than the Titans won it. I don't have Tennessee shooting up high after that win, but it's decent to finally have a win in that column instead of a 0. The New York Giants at 1-4, they came off of a win last week against the LA Chargers to end up losing to the New Orleans Saints. It was a game where there was a lot of turnovers on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, they just couldn't get the job done against Spencer Rattler. It was his first win as a starter in the NFL. And the Giants, again, it's not like after last week's win, everybody thought they were going to be game wreckers and NFC East contenders, but to follow up a win against a good Chargers team with a loss against a not-so-good Saints team, it's not a great look. The Miami Dolphins lost to Carolina on Sunday last week, bringing their record to 1-4. I have them as the number 28 team. It was a pretty large deficit for the Carolina Panthers at one point against Miami, but defensively, Miami just, the cracks came up again, and they allowed a comeback that shouldn't have happened against them. And that, more than anything, is why they're at 28 for me. 27, I have the New Orleans Saints. They beat the New York Giants on Sunday last week for the first win. It was a lot of firsts for the New Orleans Saints. It was the first win for Spencer Rattler as a starting quarterback. It was the first win for Kellen Moore as the head coach of this team and head coach, period. And it just is, like I said about the Titans, it's easier to feel better about your team with a 1 in that win record column than it is with a 0 there. The Baltimore Ravens, a team nobody thought would be here, at 1-4, a 44-10 loss to the Houston Texans. A team that's right next to them, the Cincinnati Bengals, 1-4 as well. A somewhat less lopsided loss, 37-24 to the Detroit Lions. Overall, the AFC North has had a bad start to this year, and the Ravens and the Bengals are the biggest disappointments from them. The third AFC North team, the Cleveland Browns, are 1-4 after a 21-17 loss to the Minnesota Vikings. Among the AFC North teams that aren't named the Pittsburgh Steelers, the last one to have a win is the Cleveland Browns. So, to be honest, I don't know how you could sit here and say that the Browns have played any worse than Baltimore or Cincinnati. And the same thing, I guess you could say, you can't really say they've played better either. They just traded Joe Flacco, so there's an obvious change that's going to happen, even though they already did move to Dylan Gabriel at starting quarterback. The Arizona Cardinals, already talked about them. It was more of a loss, letting up the lead, having a crazy fumble at the goal line where DeMarcado just drops the ball and it goes out of the back of the end zone. Then you fumble a Cam Ward interception, and the Titans end up recovering it in the end zone for a possible 14-point swing. One of the weirdest losses the Cardinals will have in a long time. One of the weirdest endings in games that you'll see in a very long time. At number 22, the Carolina Panthers, they're 2-3 after beating the Miami Dolphins on the road, 27-24 last week. Kansas City, a pretty tough loss. They matched Jacksonville strike for strike in that fourth quarter, and they ended up losing the game 31-28 after letting Trevor Lawrence go down and lead a game-winning touchdown drive with about a minute and 45 seconds left. The Atlanta Falcons at 20, they had a bye week this last week. They're another team that hasn't won a game for a little while. And so it's hard for me compared to these other teams who have won games or possibly are coming off of tough losses. It's kind of hard for me to think about the Falcons really any higher than any of these teams in front of them. At number 19, I have the Dallas Cowboys 2-2-1 after beating the New York Giants 37-22. George Pickens was a monster. Javonte Williams was a monster. Dak Prescott was leading an incredible offense on Sunday against the Jets team that, we thought this was a decent defense before the season started. They have a defensive-minded head coach in Aaron Glenn. And as poor of the Jets have played to start this year, I think this was pretty impressive from Dallas to be able to put up 37 against a bad team. The Houston Texans I have at 18 with a 2-3 record after they beat Baltimore 44-10 last week. It's not a win that you should go crazy about. It's not a win that you're going to look back and think of yourselves as championship contenders for late this year because there was no Lamar Jackson. There was no Kyle Hamilton. There was no Roquan Smith. There was no Marlon Humphrey. There was no Chidobia. There's a lot of people that were gone for the Baltimore Ravens where this win doesn't feel as good as it would if the Ravens were at full strength, but it still feels good to get a big-time win against that type of just organization and franchise, and especially because the offense hasn't looked good to start the year. This was a very good chance for them to actually put points up on the board, and they did it. Chicago, another team that had a Week 5 bye last week. They're 2-2. I think at 17, that's a pretty good spot for them. They haven't played really well yet, but they've played well enough to still be considered a good team. At number 16, after a couple of tough losses in a row to NFC East opponents, the last one being a 10-27 loss to the Washington Commanders, I have them at 16. As early as a couple of weeks ago, I would have told you that they're a top 5, top 6 caliber team after a 3-0 start with wins against Kansas City and others. Yeah, I would have told you they were a top 5 team, but right now 16 feels right for how their momentum has kind of swung back. Minnesota I have at number 15, a team that won last week, but still I'm not so sure about, especially compared to these teams in front of them. I don't know how far they're going to get with Carson Wentz, and with that being said, it looks even worse when J.J. McCarthy is in at quarterback, but he might be the long-term option. So I don't feel great about Minnesota. I think they have really good players, but not at the quarterback position. The LA Rams lost a tough game in overtime on Thursday Night Football to the San Francisco 49ers. It brought their record to 3-2, another team who has had a couple of losses after a really good start. But they still have some really good wins on their resume, and I think they've played really well offensively to still consider them one of the best teams in the NFC and one of the teams that could compete with Green Bay or Philadelphia or Washington, Detroit, or Tampa Bay. They're one of the teams that can offensively compete with anybody. It's the defense that, even though has played well, just has to take another step forward to make them championship contender worthy. Green Bay, a bye week this week, 2-1-1. They, kind of like the Atlanta Falcons, they haven't won a game for a while. Now, last week they tied with the Dallas Cowboys, but before that, the loss to Cleveland, I think still it's kind of a stain on Green Bay's resume right now. That loss was pretty tough to kind of swallow and look at if you're just kind of trying to be objective and say, well, here's kind of how you beat Green Bay. You really attack with an elite pass rusher. And I think as teams are going to go on, yes, they might not have somebody that's of a Myles Garrett type, but if they have good enough man coverage to kind of stick with the Green Bay Packers receivers and enough of a pass rush to get home and affect Jordan Love, that's a pretty easy recipe to beat the Packers. Number 12, I have the Seattle Seahawks. They lost 38 to 35 to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at home. But honestly, this loss, like, I honestly almost like Seattle more after losing this game than I would if they would have beat Tennessee or Cleveland or even, some of the worst teams in the NFL. This loss was a pretty as much of a moral victory as you could get, I think. It proved that your offense is elite. It proved that you're able to keep up with the top teams in the NFL scoring wise. And again, I just feel better about this loss than a win against some bad teams. The Washington Commanders, they beat the Chargers 27 to 10. Jaden Daniels came back from his knee injury. The Commanders were kind of able to stay afloat while he was gone. They lost a game, won a game, and now they're back above 500 at 3-2. I think 11 is a pretty good spot for them. A team that, with a real key signature marquee win, could easily move up into top 6, top 7 territory. The Denver Broncos I have in the top 10 at number 10 exactly. They beat Philadelphia. They were the first team to do it this year. They have a 3-2 record, and it feels like the offense is starting to kind of pick it up. The defense, they're going to be great with Pat Surtain, with Nick Bonito. They're going to be great this year. It's going to be kind of on the offense to give them those 20, 25-point performances to really win the games going forward. Pittsburgh at 3-1, another team on a bye. They're easily the best performing team in the AFC North. They have, with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, their only loss is to Seattle. And so far, that's looking like a pretty good loss. I have them as a top 10 team right now. Easily things could change by the end of the season, but from what you've seen so far, it's almost a pleasant surprise out of what's transpired with the play of Aaron Rodgers, DK Metcalf, the offense in general, and the defense has played well as well. At number 8, I have the New England Patriots, a team that did actually just get their marquee win with a win in Buffalo, 23-20. It brought their record to 3-2. A really, really good win for Drake May, for this offense, for this team, the coaching staff. This was the type of win where you look back and you're like, this is a sign of progress. This win wouldn't have happened last year with that regime and that team. Just, again, a really good win for a Patriots team that was really needing it to get their fan base all in on them. The Indianapolis Colts at 4-1, they beat the Las Vegas Raiders 40-6. This is one of the wins where, yes, it's a bad team in Las Vegas that you're beating, but this is the exact type of result that you should expect of a team that you think of as a top 10, top 5 caliber squad. 40-6 over Vegas, that is a great sign. Philadelphia, 4-1, their first loss came to the Denver Broncos. I said it in my power ranking video a couple weeks ago. Until Philadelphia gets beaten, they can't be considered anything but the number 1 team in power rankings, and they finally lost. So I think comparatively, they're 4-1 compared to the other 6 teams that are 4-1. That lands them at 6. I mean, they defensively have some pretty bad statistics. Offensively, they have some pretty bad statistics. Last week, when they beat Tampa Bay, I believe they completed 0 passes in the second half, or it was that they had 0 passing yards. Either way, the passing has been pretty bad from Philadelphia, and when you have 2 stud receivers and a great offensive line, it looks bad. And you kind of think, well, maybe Kellen Moore kind of had the recipe to how to use these 2 receivers, how to get Saquon Barkley. That's kind of the other thing, is Saquon Barkley has had, by his standards, a bad year. It's been a really bad year for Saquon Barkley. At number 5, I have the Jacksonville Jaguars, that 31-28 win against the Kansas City Chiefs. Trevor Lawrence trips over his offensive lineman, still finds a way to run the ball in the end zone, even though on a couple of angles you see maybe certain guys on Kansas City's defensive line need to be running after the ball a little bit better. But nonetheless, a great win from Jacksonville, and one of those statement wins to put them in the top 5, in my opinion. Buffalo, after the loss to New England 20-23, I think that kind of hurts their momentum a little bit. I don't think it's as bad as Philadelphia's loss, where you look at how they performed and think, well, they're worse than a lot of teams statistically. That's just not the case. They lost the game to a good team, a team that's young and trying to, get their get their footing under themselves, improve themselves to be a really good team. So this was an okay loss for the Buffalo Bills, and at least in terms of how they fit in the power rankings. The San Francisco 49ers beating the LA Rams on the road, even though it was technically Levi South for the San Francisco 49ers. Um, Still not 100%, but still winning games. It's a weird thing to kind of judge, and it's a weird thing to still even put them as the number 3 team. But how their momentum has gone throughout this season, I feel really good about where this team is. And if they get fully healthy, I feel really good about how they could compete with the other teams in the NFL. Tampa Bay, I have at number 2, 4-1 after beating Seattle 38-35. They have had a game-winning drive in all 4 games that they've won so far. And so it speaks to the level of capability of this team late in games. They're able to put the ball in the end zone. They're able to win games when it matters most. And that's probably the best thing about this team. And especially with Mike Evans down, Chris Godwin is kind of working himself back. Tristan Wirfs was out to begin the year. This has been a great start for Tampa Bay. At number 1, probably no surprise, the Detroit Lions at 4-1. They beat the Cincinnati Bengals 37-24. They look like probably the best offense in the NFL, and they look like a team that is good enough defensively. This year, they're still going through some injury issues. Terrion Arnold went down, and I believe they had another cornerback that went down. I think it was DJ Reed who went down, and it's been patched together before for Detroit. I have a lot of faith that they'll be able to patch it together and turn themselves back into a playoff Super Bowl contender. Again, probably the best offense in the NFL, and the fact that they lost both of their offensive and defensive coordinators, even though their replacements were guys who have been with the team before, and in Kelvin Shepard's case, he's been with the Lions for a long time now. And so it's maybe not super surprising that they've been possibly the best team in the NFL, but it's still like it's a really pleasant thing to see that this team didn't fall off after their off season. And even going through injuries this year, they're still one of the best teams, if not the best team in the NFL. That's going to be the video. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. If you disagree or agree with a certain team's standing, especially if it's your own favorite team, make sure you leave a comment down below as to why my ranking is wrong. And make sure you subscribe to see all my new videos, and I'll see you in the next one.